I am Dr. Markeisha Whitson. I'm a professor of public health, and I am here representing the Aurora African American Health Coalition. When I was thinking about what I wanted to do for this program, and something I recently just shared, there were so many topics that came up that were of interest to me, specific to Black health, right? Specific to women, Black women and their health. And I thought about doing breast cancer, and I thought about doing maternal health and infant mortality, sudden infant death syndrome, mental health. There were so many different directions that I could have gone in. And when I started to narrow it down and focus on specific topics, one thing that kept coming up when I talked about how do I want to present it and which direction did I want to go, because I always like leaving people with tangible recommendations, right? And what I kept landing on was self-care. So what I decided was I will give some of that information throughout this, and we'll talk about it because it is still very important, but we'll do it from the lens of self-care. And so I'm going to talk about the importance of self-care and why we need to do it, particularly as Black women, and then what that does for us, and then also how it lends to our health. And as we go through this conversation, I want to make sure that we do have that dialogue and we can engage and talk about it so that we understand where we are, what needs to be done, and how we continue to do these things to protect our health so that we don't continue to see these health disparities that we see across the board. Also, at the same time, as I go through this presentation, I want to make it very clear that we all live different lives. And while I'm going to give you a handful of things that you can do, I think it's very important to note that you have to do what works best for you and what you're able to do with the resources that you have, with the time that you have, and with the space and opportunity that you have to do it in. So as I say things, if it's something that, just doesn't fit for you, I completely understand. It's just giving you some different options because you may be in a space later on in the future where it does work for you. So we're going to focus on practicing self-care. So as I mentioned, I'm a professor, so I don't just stand up and lecture. I do like to have engagement. So when we talk about this and we think about self-care, I want everyone to think about what comes to mind. So when you hear the words self-care, what are you thinking about? What kind of pops up? How do you navigate that? You're muted.
Okay, so one thing that you can do is just exercise either at home or you can go out of your home to do that, but also good nutrition, all the things that you can do for yourself and that you know to do, because some things you can do and you just don't know to do them. So that's why something like what you're doing could be very helpful.
Yeah. So when we talk about self-care, it's really just a practice of taking care of yourself. I think someone popped up something in the chat.
Resting.
Resting. Yes. Resting is a great example of self-care. So when we talk about self-care, we think about just what you can do for yourself. And when we think about health, I want to make it very clear. Health is not just the absence of disease and illness, right? We want to consider the total person, your whole body, your whole mind, your spiritual health, your financial health. So as we talk about some of these things, we want to focus on taking care of the whole self and not just the absence of disease. But what does it look like to be mentally sound? What does it look like to be spiritually and psychologically sound? And what comes with that with you? And so the way in which I want to do that is by looking at the self-care wheel. So it breaks it down into these six different categories. And we'll go through each one and talk more about what it entails and how and what you can do to make sure you're practicing that self-care when we get there. So you have physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual, personal, and professional. And you'll notice when you look at some of the examples in the wheel, there is some overlap, because by doing things like self-reflecting and going to therapy, you can address a few of these different categories. And then similar to physical and emotional, if you do these things to take care of your body, it really helps on the other end as well. So we'll talk about each of these. I'll give you some ideas. I'll ask that you share some ideas as well, because one thing is important to note, that people take care of themselves differently. And what works for one person does not work for everyone. And so we want to make sure that we're intentional with acknowledging what works for me. I am someone that's guilty as charged. I cannot do meditation to save my life because my brain doesn't stop working, right? And it's important to know what does and doesn't work for you so that you can figure out and try different things. Now, I do encourage people to try everything because you don't know what doesn't work until you try. So I think it's important to try. And then once you find those things that do work, really focus on that. Another thing I want to point out before we continue is that there's a need for balance. You want to make sure that you have some balance with these different activities and with taking care of yourself. You need to make sure that your physical is good, but you don't want to leave out your spiritual and your personal because all of that works together to take care of the whole self and make sure that you are good and you're content and you're happy, and that those that are around you are happy as well. Another key thing with going back to why I decided to choose self-care is because as Black women, sometimes it seems like, in reality is, you have the weight of the world on your shoulder. And so being able to manage that, because we know that you cannot take care of others if you're not fully taking care of yourself. There's only so much you can give. And if you aren't also giving to yourself, you won't have anything to give to anyone else. The analogy I always like to use with this is thinking when you're on an airplane and those oxygen things fall from the top. If you're traveling with a little kid or an elderly person or someone that may not be as physically able, they'll tell you, put the mask on yourself first, and then you help your child or you help whoever else that you're with. So it's very important that we put that mask on ourselves and we make sure that we practice that self-care, and we do it in all these different areas of our lives so that we can show up big for ourselves, but also continue to show up for those that rely on us. So the first piece that we'll talk about is physical self-care. And Dr. Boone, you've kind of already led with some of these, right? It's that physical activity, it's eating well. Those are the ones that we tend to automatically think about when we talk about physical self-care. And the one thing I want to talk about with this is those are important, but what I don't want you to do is beat yourself up when you can't get in 30 minutes, 5 or 6 days a week, right? Every little bit counts. You just want to see improvement. I was just watching a TikTok the other day, and the guy mentioned, 10,000 steps is great, but if you were only getting 1,000 before, 3,000 is just as good. So you want to make sure that you are able to do what works for you and your lifestyle, but you want to try to get something in. And that doesn't mean exercising does not mean you have to go to the gym. It doesn't even mean you have to go outside. One of the things that I started doing is when I'm on the phone, I just walk around, right? It's an easier way to get steps. You're having a conversation. And so you can pick up some steps that way. So trying to figure out different ways in which you can incorporate physical activity if you don't have time to do it, or set aside those 30 minutes a day. And recognizing that people work, right? You have children, you have families, and it's not as easy. And we now live in a time where people work multiple jobs. And so it requires a little bit more to really be able to do what needs to get done and still get that physical activity in. So little things like, being on the phone, walking. If you go to a store, park in the back of the parking lot and then take those extra steps and walk around. So anything that you can do to increase your physical activity, ideally you want to get your heart rate up a little bit, is always a plus. And while it's great to do that, 30 minutes, 5 times a week, whatever you can do is something. Another one, a big one that we talk about is nutrition. I am not telling you to throw out all of your food. What I am asking is to consider different ways in which you can improve it. Maybe you add more vegetables. Maybe you add more fruit. Maybe you swap out your meat. I am someone, and I think a lot of Black women are specifically, we come from families where meat and fat is like a huge part of everything. Food in general is a part of our celebrations. It's how do we show that we care and we're enjoying ourselves. And one of the things that I've just been trying to do, and I encourage you to do, is do little substitutions. I cannot make greens for Thanksgiving and take them to my grandma's house without a meat in them. So instead of using ham hocks, I've transitioned to turkey leg, right? So things like that, where you make those small substitutions, they go a long way. And it still allows you to have food in a way in which you enjoy it. What I don't want is for you to start hating food, because then you just have a terrible relationship with food. So looking for those different ways in which you can incorporate things to be healthier, right? So that you still get what you want, but there's just a healthier way to do it. Do either of you have any examples of how you've either tried to increase your physical activity in a way that didn't require going to the gym or change your nutrition?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm big uh exercise gym rat, but I bought the under the desk pedal.
Okay.
So under the desk while I'm sitting down, I can be actually pedaling. And that
Hmm.
also is exerting good hip, thigh, and leg um, muscles. And I also have the little hand weights, and I can move the hand weights up and down. And I have the hand cruncher. I don't know, it should be behind me somewhere. But that's what you do when you just hold it like this and you just
Hmm.
it from time to time. So that helps all the way up your arm, the tendons, the hands, the fingers, and your lower elbow area. Hmm.
Hmm.
So, yeah, incorporate things at home so that you don't have to pay for a gym.
Yeah, and it's definitely possible. And I think sometimes we forget that. And I think it's important to acknowledge that.
Hmm.
Another key piece to physical self-care that we don't talk about as loud is safe housing, right? If you're in a position where your housing isn't safe, and we're, we can be talking about physical abuse here as well, then that's something in which you want to, if you are able to, reevaluate your situation and seek help, right? So you always want to make sure with physical care, you're considering all these different areas. And the last thing I want to talk about physical care is healthcare. Go and getting the care that you need, which takes me to the next slide. These are the recommended screenings that are out there for women in particular and for Black women. Now, before I go through these, one thing I do want to note is when we talk about the win is very specific and subjective. You also have to consider your health and your family history. Family history will change everything on here. If you have a family history of something like breast cancer or colon cancer, you will want to go more regularly and get different things and get the mammogram and get a colonoscopy and things like that. So always keep that in mind. But one of the most important things that you should do annually is get a physical exam. It's important that you have a primary care physician. If you do not have a primary care physician, it's something that we are able to help you with our coalition. If that's something that you need, you can send us an email and we can help connect you with someone. But it's very important that you have a primary care physician so that you can get that annual physical exam. It'll be a physical exam, and you should get a comprehensive blood panel workup. And it will include things like the A1C for diabetes, cholesterol, in addition to other things. But it's important that you have that. And one of the things that I will say, if you don't have a primary care physician, or if you do have one, but you're maybe looking for someone else, it is completely okay to interview your doctor. You want to make sure that you are with someone that you trust, that you've built a rapport with, that you are comfortable talking to, because that is who you're going to see the most. And depending on your health insurance, that's who kind of controls what other things you can do if you are under an HMO where you have to get those referrals to go to specialists. So it's very important that you have a good relationship with your doctor, and don't be afraid to ask questions and essentially interview them if that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for one or looking to switch. So that should be done annually. Blood pressure is typically done during that time as well. And that screens for hypertension or high blood pressure, which is something that we do see fairly common in our community. That should be done annually as well, or directed by your doctor. If you come from a family history of high blood pressure, then of course you will want to get this done more often. If you yourself have a history of high blood pressure, you'll want to get this done more often. So that's another one that you want to think about and make sure that you get accomplished. It's also something that we provide at our annual health fair for free to attendees. Another one is the A1C test, and that screens for high blood sugar levels, which is associated with diabetes. So if you have a family history of diabetes, or if you have personal concerns about it, talk to your doctor about this. It's one that you would get in a panel. It is one that's typically offered. And if you do have that history, if you are obese, then they'll also offer it. But it's something that you should get done annually, depending on what your history looks like. But it's very important. Prediabetes is very real, and you can catch it early enough where it doesn't progress to diabetes. And then you can start taking those necessary steps to take care of yourself. So that's when we talk about addressing your nutrition, addressing your physical activity. But a lot of this comes from just being in regular contact with your doctor and having those conversations. Same thing for cholesterol, which can lead to heart disease, which is a top killer of Black women. And a lot of times it goes undetected because the signs are a little bit different in terms of how they present in women versus men. So it's important to understand that. And then also, I would be remiss to not acknowledge the fact that sometimes when Black women go to the doctor, there are biases and stigma and discrimination there that don't allow Black women to be heard the same way. So it's important that, again, you have that rapport with your physician so that you can be an advocate for yourself and make sure your voice is being heard. So when you're saying, these are some of the things I'm experiencing, it's not normal for me, they take it seriously. So cholesterol is every 5 years or as directed again by your doctor. And it really depends on your family history and then your own history. Another one is a pap test, pap smear, or an HPV test, which is the human papilloma virus, a test for that. And it screens for cervical cancer. And in young men, it's for penile cancer. But cervical cancer screening should begin it should begin at the age of 21. However, if you are sexually active at a younger age, it may begin earlier. One thing I also want to mention is that there is a difference between your annual pelvic exam and a pap test. A pap test or a pap smear does test the cells in your cervix. So they will obtain some of the cells and view them and make sure they aren't cancerous or displaying cervical dysplasia. Cervical dysplasia is like the initial part, the initial stages before it becomes cervical cancer. And many times, if you are getting your regular pap smears, that can get detected earlier and it can be treated so that your cervical dysplasia does not turn into cervical cancer. There is also a HPV vaccine that is recommended for young girls around the age of 12. There are some issues with that, and I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge it. People do have feelings about having their young daughters receive vaccines to address HPV, which is a sexually transmitted disease. However, there is a lot of research out there that you want to get the vaccine prior to your first encounter, your first sexual encounter, just because HPV is so prevalent and many times it goes undiagnosed unless you do develop cervical cancer or other outward symptoms such as genital warts. So it is important to be aware of that and to get that vaccine if you're able to. And I think they've recently changed the recommendations where now they are recommending up to the age of 40 to go ahead and get it. So that is something to consider as well when we think about our checkups and our screenings and that other preventive care. Another one is a mammogram. Black women are more likely to die of breast cancer than white women, right? And getting a mammogram can help find breast cancer early, which is one of the reasons why Black women are more likely to die. It's not because it's just more aggressive or anything like that. It's because we probably were less likely to get it detected at an early enough stage to really do those treatments, again, for a lot of different reasons, which is why it's important that you have a great relationship with your primary care physician, because you'll build up that rapport and you'll be able to have that conversation with them. So women 45 to 54 should be checked. And then when you're older, or annually, and then when you get older, you can check every other year. Caveat to this is that if you have a history of breast cancer in your family, especially if your men get it too, you should get checked a lot earlier. One thing I like to recommend when I talk with young ladies about their reproductive health is that you do self-breast exams monthly. If you are doing a self-breast exam monthly, you're more likely to be able to tell the difference in your breast tissue. So if you are regularly in a shower or in a place where you can smoothly run your hands over your breast, and then you should hold your arms up, like I'm sitting here doing a breast exam. You should hold your arms up in different ways. And then you go this way, you can go in circles and you can go up and down, and just making sure you're familiar with your breast tissue. So that way, if something doesn't seem normal, you can go get it looked at early, but that's the importance of doing it monthly. And you should not do it when you are menstruating, because your breasts just feel different during that time as well. Lastly is colorectal cancer screening. So that screens for colorectal cancer. You can also get a colonoscopy, and people at average risk will start regularly at the age of 45. This is what we're noticing more in African Americans, is that it's presenting a lot earlier. I think some of the key ones that we can kind of associate with is Chadwick Boseman, which is Black Panther, and how young he was when he developed colon cancer. So if you have a family history of it, if you're noticing irregular bowel movements that what you're not used to, either more frequent or less frequent, please talk to someone. Again, the importance of having a primary care physician that you trust. I can't stress that enough. You want to be able to go to them when anything goes on and not feel dismissed. So that's also something to consider. And one that I didn't put on here, that is something that we're seeing a little bit more, particularly with African American women, is thyroid conditions. Make sure your thyroid levels are getting checked. A lot of times, thyroids are not checked until you go in for something else, and your doctor kind of looks and they go, "Oh, your thyroid looks big. Have you considered this?" Thyroid cancer is something that can be detected early. It is one of the easily curable ones. When it's caught early by removing the thyroid, you will be put on medication for the rest of your life, but it's important to make sure that you recognize that too. Are there any questions on the recommended health screenings? I know that was a mouthful. Okay. Next is psychological self-care. So psychological self-care is really focusing on your mind and things that have it so that you're able to relax and think freely, things that help you kind of woo-saw, right? What they say in Bad Boys, rub your ears and woo-saw. So it's something that really helps you to relax. And that looks different for everyone. Certain things you can do: you can journal, you can garden, you can read. I'm like that girl that's carrying 20 books. I read like 20 books a month. Like, that's how I read, because that's my relaxation. So every night I try to get in at least an hour of reading, because it's how I calm down. Aromatherapy is something else that you can do. But when we talk about the psychological care, you want to make sure that you're doing what works for you. You want to make sure that you have these different things that you can do, because it is something that sometimes when you get into the mindset of doing the same thing over and over, you may not get what you need out of it anymore. So it's important that you understand that you can try different things and do stuff that will help you as you do this. So I always think about, what else can I do? What else excites me? But if you're like me, you'll just stick with books forever, because I clearly have a problem with books. This is also about self-awareness. So that's, if the picture at the top is a young lady that's journaling. So making sure you know where your triggers are is so key in your psychological self-care, because then it helps you avoid them, or it helps you work through them. But being aware of that is important. But it really, again, just focuses on the ability to relax and all of that. And one other key thing with psychological self-care that I think Black women in particular, I keep saying that, have to, we have to get better, and I understand the history there with it, is we need to practice asking for and being open to receiving help. We very often put on the red cape, right? We are superwoman, not always by choice, most of the times not by choice. We're expected to solve the world's problems, right? You have to manage home, you have to manage work, you have to manage the emotions of everyone else while still trying to take care of yourself. And it becomes a heavy load to carry. I don't like to call it a burden, right? Because, you know, a lot of what you're carrying is your family. So it just becomes a heavy load to carry. So one of the things I think we really need to do is practice asking for help, but then once you ask for it, be okay with receiving it. And it takes time. You also have to build up a support system in a community that is there for you that you can rely on to pick it up when you hand it to them. It's easier said than done. It takes a lot of years and practice and training and knowledge of self to have people in your community that can do that for you. But it's very important that we're able to take some of it off of our shoulders and give it to someone else and allow them to do it. So be in a space and practice asking for help, even if you start small. Just start looking for ways in which you can ask for help so that you can relieve some things from you. Comments or question about this? How do you guys take care of yourself? What are some things you do to relax? Okay, we'll keep going. So next is emotional care. This is one that I really like because I have a little girl. She's 6 years old, and her hair looks like that right now. Um, this one kind of talks about similar to psychological care, you're taking care of yourself and your emotions. This one focuses on self-love and self-compassion. Many times it is so easy for us to forgive others of their wrongdoing, but we really struggle to forgive ourselves when we have a misstep. And it's so important that the same grace that you give to others that you give to yourself, because everyone isn't going to give it to you. And so if you don't give it to yourself, then you get it from no one. So it's really important that as you go through things, and if you mess up at work, if you mess up at home, if you forget to do something, it's okay to be able to look at yourself and say, it's okay. The world didn't stop. I can move on from this and learn from it, right? We harbor so much in terms of, and it's not from nowhere, right? There are reasons why we feel like we have to be the best and the greatest and we don't have room for error. But making sure you give yourself that compassion to do it, making sure you look at yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, you rock. I love you. So affirmations are really big on this. And I've seen things where, you put Post-its in your mirror in the morning. So when you wake up in the morning and you stand in the mirror, you read an affirmation. I do these with my daughter on the way of dropping her off from school. And I have her repeat them. And she goes, oh, we have to do these again. You're going to do them every day. Because I need you to know, if no one else has told you, I need you to know that, you're strong, you're great, you're independent, you're a great friend, you're a kind person, you are enough. And I think it's important that we do that, and taking care of ourselves emotionally is the best way to do that. But it all starts with allowing yourself the grace, the grace, the understanding, the forgiveness to stutter step a little and then take what you need to kind of get back on track. So that's what we talk about with our emotional care. Do things that kind of make you smile, watch a funny movie, always look yourself in the mirror and talk about how fine you are. Because if ain't nobody else gonna know, you should know it for yourself. And just always give yourself that uplift. But it's really important that you have those affirmations. And if you do have younger children at home, I encourage you to do it with your daughters. Start it early with them to let them know that they are loved, they are enough, and they are capable and able, because they're going to be labeled as so many other things. And so as long as they have that in them, then it goes a long way. And so that emotional self-care is so important. And the longer you go without it, the harder it is to get it. So it's really important to practice that grace, to give yourself the room and the space for that. Questions about emotional self-care? No. Okay. Next is spiritual self-care. This looks different for everyone, right? It's just a matter of kind of becoming one, settling down, talking to, seeking whoever it is you pray to, you talk to, you believe in. It can be God, it can be the universe, it can be Mother Nature, whatever it is. It's connecting with that spiritual piece, that deeper part. And that looks different for everyone. That can be yoga, that can be meditation, it can be praying. Some people are able to connect more spiritually when they sing. It's why when certain songs come on, people just break down and have a lot of tears. They do the opposite. They just feel so much joy because there's something in that song that brings a spirit out in you, a spirit of calmness, a spirit of peace, a spirit of relaxation. It's why you have music in a lot of these different apps that talk about or that help you calm down or wind down or meditate because it can be very relaxing. So that is just really looking at cherishing yourself, finding that spirit that's deep down in you and a way to bring it out. And again, it looks different. I can say this for every single thing. It looks different for each person. And what's important is finding what works for you and how you can then take that and transition it. So the next one, we only have a couple more left because there's only 6, is personal care. Personal care is my favorite. I'm a social butterfly, but I'm low-key an introvert. But I have my core group of friends, and you can't tell me nothing about them, and I love them to death. And that personal care is nourishing and nurturing those relationships. So making sure you hang out with your friends and you breathe life into each other. Making sure you have that time with your family and you take care of those. So personal care is taking care of all those different things in your space that make you happy and are directly related to you. One of them, I was just talking to one of my friends today about a vision board, right? Doing a vision board to see this is where I want to see myself in the future. These are my personal goals, but being able to vision it and writing it down. Those who write down their goals are more likely to achieve them, right? You've made it tangible. You have a plan. You can see it written down. You can go out and get it. I have the money on the side because another personal goal for a lot of people is getting out of debt, right? Being able to release yourself financially, being able to have those financial freedoms, which again are easier said than done. People are struggling financially right now. And so acknowledging that is important, but making sure you look at what it is that you want to do, what it is that you want to achieve, and start taking out the time to really do that for yourself. Personal self-care also looks like, going to get a massage, going to get a manicure, a pedicure, any of those things that make you feel good is important. And then tying that into, again, those long-term and short-term goals and what that looks like, and just enjoying family or whatever it is that brings you a sense of peace. And I'll wrap it up with our last one. I went the wrong way, my apologies. Our last one is professional self-care. Now, this is the one that gets a little tricky because I want you to keep your job, but I also want you to keep your sanity, right? So some of these things are easier said than done. You can't do them as much as you would like. I have a job as a professor where you're almost never off, right? Especially in an online environment, because students can email you at any time. You respond to them throughout the weekend. You really can't take time off unless it's in the summer or you aren't teaching. So it's a position in which you're always on. So I get that. And while I'm saying that, I recognize that all of these things may not be feasible, but I still want to make sure we talk about how to take care of yourself professionally. The first one, and I did this in terms of what I view as being the easiest one to do, going towards some that may be a little bit more difficult. But the first one is take your breaks. You wouldn't believe the number of people that have working lunches, or they sit at their desk and they work, or you look up and they've missed their 15-minute break, and then they've missed their 30-minute break, and then they missed their 15-minute break, and they've worked through all of their breaks. Take your break. You are legally obligated to get one, so take it. Don't eat lunch at your desk. Even if you have to eat in your car, don't eat at your desk. Try to take yourself away from your work environment for those 30, 45 minutes, for an hour, whatever it is that you get, and take your break. It's very important that you take that time to step away, even if it's just to deep breathe. Maybe you have to make some phone calls to set up a doctor's appointment. Maybe you have a virtual doctor's appointment. Whatever the case may be, make sure you take your breaks. This is important because it gives you that pause and allows you to be more efficient too at work. Next is leave work at work. 9 to 5, 7 to 3, whatever your schedule is, if you can leave it there when you're done, leave it there. When you work from home, close the laptop down and tell yourself, I'm not going to go back until the next day. So leaving work at work is very important, and having those boundaries, all of these are focused around boundaries at work and being okay with being able to exert your boundaries and say, no, I'm off at 5. Even if you text me, I'm not responding. I will get back to you later. I will talk to you Monday at 9 o'clock. So try to leave work at work if you're able to. Next is use your PTO and sick time. It's yours. Use it. Put it in, request it all. Use your sick time. Sick time can be used for mental health day. A mental health day is a I just ain't got it today day, and that's okay. So make sure you're using all of your time. If your job does allow you to store it up, go ahead and store it up and then take a bigger vacation the next year, but make sure you're using it. And I know a lot of times if you're planning on leaving a job, you won't use it because you'll store it up so you can get it paid out. I recognize that as well. But if you have a job that doesn't allow you to roll over it, use your paid time off. It's yours. You've earned it. Use it. And I know there's this whole thing where like, oh, you have to request time off and it's a whole process and all the funny memes about I'm not requesting time off. I'm just letting you know I'm not gonna be here. So whether you approve it or not, you're not gonna see me, right? Use that time off and use your sick time because sick time in particular is rarely, if ever, paid out. So you want to make sure you use all the days that you have with that. Next is learn to say no. Now, by learning to say no, you might run into some other issues. So you have to be cautious about what you're saying no to, and understanding when you're in a position to say no. And if you aren't in a position to necessarily say no, then hopefully you're in a position where you can talk to your supervisor or your manager to work out something where maybe it's not no, but it's just a not right now. Like, I can do this, but not right now. Be okay with saying, I don't have the bandwidth because I'm doing X, Y, and Z. It's also important to do that because if you continue to take on responsibilities within your same 40 hours, within your same check, they're going to keep giving them to you. And then you're going to have more and more responsibilities and you're not going to have any more money and you should be getting paid for the extra work that you're doing. So learn to say no in the spaces where you can, or learn to say not right now, or can I do this later? And again, I understand it's easier said than done. I'm not telling anybody to go into work renegade tomorrow and risk losing your job, but just try to figure out a way to implement some of these boundaries. And the last one, it's plan your next career move. If you aren't in the position that you ultimately want to be, plan your next move, whether that means going to get a different certification, get an advanced degree, volunteering, doing some career shadowing, talking to your current manager about what you need to do to move up the ladder, whatever that is, always start thinking about those next steps. When you go into a position, a job interview, ask what the organizational chart looks like. Ask what it takes to get to that next step. And then after some time, if you see it's not going to happen, start planning a way to position yourself to go to those next steps, maybe in that company or in another one. But it's always important that as part of your professional self-care, your professional development, is to continue planning your next steps and how you're going to get to where you ultimately want to be in your career. So all of these things that I've talked about today are just really key to managing your stress. And if you know nothing else about your health, you will know that your stress is such a huge factor in how your health will go. If you've ever been sick, or if you know someone who's been sick and are going through their journey of healing, you'll know that a doctor will tell you, try to keep off the stress. Try to keep it away, do things to relax. Don't put yourself in high stress environments. By practicing this self-care, you position yourself to take better care of your health and to be able to go out there and have those conversations with the providers that you need and to be an advocate. And even if you can't be an advocate in every avenue, you can be an advocate in some, and then also be an advocate for others who don't have a voice, which is just as important. I am regularly getting phone calls from other people asking if I can understand their health insurance plan as they get ready to look for a job and what that means. So making sure that you can lend to others as well. But that's it for me today. I just wanted to make sure I talked about self-care because I think it's just always overlooked and it's such a critical foundational piece of who we are. And as Black women, we have the weight of the world on our shoulders. And it's so important that we're able to take care of ourselves as we're holding up that globe on our back, and continuing through our day while catching all the strays.